I am so honored to help moderate today's panel discussion. Not sure if you heard a lot, but we had a very good session this morning. And Mick, what I want to start off with is if you could all just basically introduce yourself, but let me help a little bit with Mick Mulvaney. Mick spoke to AMCHAM several years ago during COVID. And I think he is one of the true experts we have here today, since he was the former chief of staff to President Trump. So we expect a lot of interesting dialogues with you today, Mick. But why don't we ask you to just give a quick self-introduction on what you're doing these days.
Sure, James, and thank you so much for having me back. You know, you mentioned that that discussion that we had online at the beginning of COVID. What you don't realize, I think, is that I believe that this chamber was the very first group to ask me to speak after I left the White House. So it means a great deal to me, and it's a true privilege to be invited back. The Chief of Staff to the President of the United States, any Chief of Staff has a unique position in that you are the only person who gets paid to tell the President what he doesn't want to hear. It's a very, very difficult job to do. Many people made fun of Donald Trump or criticized him for having 4 chiefs of staff in his first term. Barack Obama had 4 as well. The life expectancy of a chief of staff is very short. Many presidents of the United States don't like hearing what they don't want to hear. They surround themselves with people who agree with them most of the time. And the chief of staff is usually the person who tells them the stuff that no one else wants to. It's a fascinating sort of introduction to the business world. I was in the private sector before I went to the White House, and I will take this quick opportunity, James, to tell your businessmen and women who are there that if you do not have someone like a chief of staff working for you, if you do not have someone whose job it is to tell you the things you don't want to hear, then you have a blind spot. You must have somebody who you trust, who has credibility with you, who can tell you from time to time that things are not exactly as they appear. And when that breaks down at your business, it could be a failure. And if it breaks down in the White House, it could be a colossal failure. So that is the role of Chief of Staff. And I say that as I look forward to the conversation tonight and maybe telling you folks some things you already know, some telling you things you don't know, and then possibly telling you some things you don't want to hear.
Thank you so much. You know, I've been a big fan of Mick, all these years, and I will continue to be a big fan of yours, Mick.
Thanks, James.
So just moving on, maybe we can start with you, Hector, as well as a special, introduction for yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. First of all, thank you for the invitation. Chairman Son, thank you for the invitation to this great event. I'm very happy to be here. So as you mentioned, I am Hector Villarreal. I look after GM operations in the GM Asia Pacific region, including GM Korea. And let me tell you a little bit about GM Korea. We are proud to be the largest foreign direct investor in the sector. We operate 3 manufacturing hubs, and together employ more like 11,000 talented team members here in Korea. Our engineering center, we have 2 engineering centers, one in Bupyeon and the other one in Seogna. We have 3,000 employees who are working on designing vehicles for more than 20 vehicle programs. So it is an important operation. We are very happy to contribute to the Korea economy. Last year, we produced actually close to 500 million cars. We produce here the Chevrolet trucks and the Trailblazer, very successful in the global markets, also very successful here in Korea. And one of the targets that we have for this year is to solidify our position in the domestic market here. It's a very competitive market, and we need to do better selling cars in Korea.
And as some of you know, I used to work at GM and work very closely with Hector.
Sorry, I think Jim, sorry to interrupt you, Jim is very humble. He was actually my boss. And the problem with Jim is that once he's your boss, he is always your boss.
Not true at all, but I do want to say that Hector was one of the best executives that I had a chance to work with at GM, which is the reason why I think GM is making new strides to be even more successful here in this market. So let's move to Jakob from GR Korea.
Well, thank you very much, and it's an honor to be here. I feel that the light, the very bright scene here is a little bit symptomatic of what we are looking at, a very bright future. My name is Jakob Edberg. I'm the president and CEO of the GR company, also director of GR Korea. We basically do what is in our name, so government relations. We help our clients understanding and relate to policy, political, regulatory challenges and opportunities, and there are plenty of them right now. And thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very much looking forward to today.
And Jakob, you should know your people here in Korea, they're doing a very good job, especially Ji-yeon Moon, who did not pay me to say this, but she's a terrific leader here. So thank you for putting a good team together.
Thank you very much.
And lastly, one of my favorite Korean companies, SK. So we have Moo-hwan Kim joining us.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Moo-hwan Kim from SK Innovation. I'm leading Energy Solution Business Division in SK Innovation, which is the energy part of the SK Group. This is my 23rd year in SK, and I actually started my career from SK Telecom, which James has mentioned earlier. I'm really proud of. And since the beginning of our group, I think you know better than me about SK Group, but since the beginning of the group, I think U.S. is very crucial global partner, all the way down. And up to now, SK Group invested about $35 billion in the U.S. Entirely, and out of them, $23 billion for energy business. And SK Innovation solely actually deployed the capital as much as $13 billion up to now, which is tremendous volume that actually we can invest. So U.S. is not really just the marketplace that we've been playing, but more like really strategic ground that we really want to grow and collaborate with many folks in the market. So really look forward to seeing that this platform serves as a really constructive opportunity to speak out our plan and our vision going forward. Thank you.
And as I mentioned earlier today, I just came back from a huge signing ceremony between AWS and SK. I think that will change the game in AI for both countries. So congratulations. So I know that we have limited time. So let me ask a question to Mick, starting off the gate here. Mick, I'm sure you're aware that Korea is going through a lot of interesting but very challenging situations. You got the China issue, you got all the political uncertainty that is finally resolved after we have a new president 2 weeks ago, and the tariffs discussion that President Trump has undertaken with Korea is obviously a big challenge. Hey, besides you being the chief of staff, I know you're also the person in charge of OMB, the Office of Management and Budget for the White House. So I think your perspective would be very important because you are the only one here who spent time with President Trump day in and day out.
Yeah, I spent almost 4 years in the White House the first time around. If I wanted to look at U.S.-Korea relations, these are the things I would look at. Number one, tariffs. Tariffs are real. Tariffs are what Donald Trump likes to use as leverage. There was a little bit of uncertainty in this country as to whether or not, when he announced the new tariffs on April 2nd, a few months ago, as to whether or not they would be permanent tariffs designed to sort of encourage domestic American manufacturing. Would we be making shoes again in the U.S.? Or were they leverage points for larger trade deals? I think now we know the answer to that, James, and the tariffs are there as negotiating leverage. Donald Trump wants to renegotiate trade deals with all of our trade partners. That's probably not making news. This is, and I think people misunderstand Donald Trump in many ways. One of them is that Donald Trump knows that if I negotiate a deal with you, James, and I win and you lose in that deal, and then I go to another one of your panelists and I negotiate a deal with them, and I win in that deal and they lose, then the third member of the panel won't want to do business with me. Donald Trump doesn't do business like that for that reason. Donald Trump tries to negotiate deals that allow both sides to win. And I think that is lost in sort of the discussion about American tariffs. Are American tariffs bad for America? I think you could make the case. They certainly increase prices and so forth and have the tendency to do so, at least in the short run. But I think as leverage towards doing better trade deals, they could be good for America and good for our trading partners. And I think you'll see more and more of that. I've been a little disappointed with the rate of the deals that have been cut. I think we've announced a deal with the UK, maybe sort of the precursors of a deal with China and so forth, but we've not had the number of trade deals that I hope that we've had. I know that there's been Korean trade delegation in the United States several times in the last couple of months, and I hope that those discussions continue to be fruitful. But I think it's important to know that a good deal to Donald Trump is also a good deal for the people that he's working with, because otherwise no one wants to deal with him again, and he can't have that. That's something he brings from his time in the private sector. Now, the other thing you mentioned is the sort of larger relationships. And I think that the U.S.-American relationship will be looked at specifically through the lens of how it impacts China. There are very, very few things that are bipartisan in Washington, D.C. I've never seen my government as divided as it is right now. There's a short list of things that both Democrats and Republicans share and agree on, and one of them is concern about China. And we continue to look at our overseas relationships through that lens, through that perspective. How does our relationship with Korea impact China? How does our relationship with Japan impact China? How does our relationship with Australia impact China? That is going to be a central focus of all of our discussions. We are interested not in hurting China. That's not what this is about. This is about trying to encourage China to join the first rank of nations. Put yourself in our shoes from back in 2020. I left the White House in March of 2020. I was the chairman of the first COVID task force before Mike Pence took over. China was not a good actor. China was not sharing information with the rest of the world, and the rest of the world suffered dramatically as a result. Korea would not act that way. Canada would not act that way. The United Kingdom would not act that way. Those are leading nations of the world, first-tier nations. And Donald Trump wants China not to fail. That's not what he wants. He wants China to join those tiers of nations. And all of our relationships, most specifically with Korea, will be looked at through that lens.
So, Mick, thank you so much for your very valuable insights that only a guy like you could offer. So let me turn it over to Jakob. So, Jakob, one takeaway from our visit to Washington, D.C. for our door knock was the U.S.-Korea relations seem very, very high. They're all insisting on U.S., Korea, Japan trilateral relationship. So how can President Lee Jae-myung, President Trump, and Prime Minister Ishiba work together to enhance this trilateral cooperation, which will only help with China compete?
Well, thank you very much. I think that led very well. The China angle is, of course, the key here. At the same time, I think I would also echo the fact that there is completely a consensus in Washington, D.C. on China, and I think there is consensus growing also with Japan and Korea on that issue, and highlighting that the challenge now that the race of China poses is credible. We have three rather newly elected leaders. As I said earlier this morning, I think trade is a lot about trust. So first of all, just having the leaders getting together, and it's been very difficult to get that organized, but just getting it together and showing all the cards. It looks like we have very practical leaders in the three countries wanting to see practical things done, not very, and so that's useful. I think also we have seen recently quite a warming up of the relations with the perception of Japan in Korea, and the perception of Korea in Japan has been improving tremendously over the past 10 years, but also recently over the 5 years. So I think we are also redefining the economic relationship here, and I think this is really important. I want to make this message. What I get from the conversations in DC is that the time of Japan and Korea basically producing and selling, and the US is paying for it, that's over. It's not coming back. Only that economic model. What is required, and what I see from the US government, and what I think US is expecting, is some sort of agency which is on the Japanese and the Korean side, in where basically we, and I mean Japan and Korea, come up with ideas of how these issues cannot be solved. It will not be the US coming with laundry lists and then the bureaucracies in Korea and Japan figuring out how can we get away with this, how can we get away with this, like parents telling children what to do, and they do as little as possible to just check the boxes. And this requires completely new thinking, both in Korea and in Japan, on how to also be the consumers, the buyers of US goods. And I think this is really a challenge. I think in a trilateral, the security alliance aside, which is extremely important, but from a trilateral perspective, Japan and Korea faces this same challenge, and I think a dialogue around that, and I think coordination between Japan and Korea, not how to get away from US demands, but actually how to be a meaningful economic partner is really critical at this point in time.
And I think your perspective on Japan is very helpful, because I know you have a big operation in Japan. So thank you. So I'm going to follow up with you a little bit, Mick, on the trilateral situation. I just know that the previous administration of both Korea and the U.S., they really focused heavily on the trilateral relations, especially between Korea and Japan, given the frayed relationship historically between the two countries. Where does President Trump fit into this trilateral conversation? And how does he feel about the U.S., Korea, Japan partnership?
Yeah, his natural starting point, James, is that he doesn't really like multilateral discussions. It was one of the reasons we never engaged on the Trans-Pacific Partnership when we came into office in 2017. I was there at the beginning of the administration when I was the budget director, and we talked about the TPP, and he said, look, I don't like multilateral discussions. That's not his natural starting point. He wants to deal one-on-one. By the way, he also wants to deal principle to principle. I think one of the biggest challenges he's going to face in dealing with China is that China wants to work things through lower level functionaries first and then move up the system. Donald Trump wants to work the exact opposite, which is talk president to president and have that filter down, but that's not your question. Generally speaking, we did talk regularly about the relationship between Korea and Japan, and Trump's attitude was, look, I don't understand it. He understands it, but he wants it to he doesn't want it to interfere with what's happening today. We all have issues that go back 70, 80 years. America, for the most part, has moved on from those. We have an excellent relationship with Japan. We have an excellent relationship with Germany, for example. And Trump kept, wondering, why is this an impediment today? We know the answer to the question. We know why it is. But I think he's interested in seeing us move beyond that. That's not very interesting to anybody watching this. What is interesting, I hope, is this. I think he would be more than happy to help that happen. I think he sees it in America's best interest. Go back to your America first sort of perspective. It's in America's best interest for our friends to be friends with each other. For Japan and Korea and Australia, and with a growing perspective, Vietnam, to get along and to be looking for ways to encourage that. Donald Trump, at the end of the day, remember, he's a businessman who happened to be elected president, and he still looks at the world as a businessman would. And as a businessman, you have past business associates, current business associates, and future potential business associates. And I think he just wants to see everybody as either a current or a future potential associate who's able to put the things in the past behind so that you could work together in the future. That's the perspective I think he's going to bring to the tripartite, the trilateral conversations between U.S., Korea, and Japan.
I like your line, Mick, about how President Trump likes to see friends be friends with each other. And that's Japan and Korea. Now, let's talk about the U.S.-Korea Technology Alliance, because I think that's a very, very important one. In our trip to Washington, D.C., a lot of our meetings centered on the U.S.-Korea Alliance as a true technology partnership. In fact, just last Friday, I mentioned how I visited your Ulsan data center, agreement between AWS and SK. And I think SK is truly leading that whole charge on the alliance. So, Moo-hwan, let me ask you this question. SK, you mentioned, invested about $30-some-odd billion in America, all in technology. So why and what are the most promising areas do you see for a bilateral industrial cooperation?
Thank you, James, for that question. So I think, deepening alliance of U.S.-Korea technology collaboration really varies very widely across, the surge of the AI at this point. But if I talk about my focus point, which is in energy, I would like to bring up nuclear side as a primary one. We see that lots of advanced reactors now under development in the U.S. market now, and lots of new technology has been deployed and tried to be commercialized even at this point. But I think that this is a really great chance for us to just see around what sort of an aspect that we can collaborate in many ways as a complementary aspect. So given the fact that U.S. is really good at developing new innovative and breakthrough technology of nuclear, which is SMR, small modular reactor. But in terms of then commercializing that, I think that there is another part that we need to take into account, which is construction, engineering, and operation and commissioning, right? I think that Korea has a really great capability to execute those kind of capability in the field very well. So I think combining very innovative technology from U.S. of the nuclear with Korea's EPC and commissioning capability really create a very synergetic effect for conveying and delivering the nuclear plant on budget within the time frame. I think that this is one of the ways that I really think that very seriously. What sort of actual structure that we can collaborate. But the other part as related to nuclear might be fuel side. So no matter what sort of a reactor of the nuclear, like SMR, which is an advanced one, should be activated, there's a necessity of all the fuel side, which is another advanced technology. And given the fact that 40% of the fuel side is still relying on Russian one, I think there is a really substantial change to replace that sort of supply chain dependency to the allies countries. I think this is one of the ways that Korea can collaborate with the U.S. To expedite all the fuel production for more like extending the footprint of the SMR in the long run. So those are two aspects that SK Korea and U.S. can collaborate and cooperate for a technological advancement going forward.
And Mick, I'm not even sure if a lot of the American citizens are even aware of SK and how much they've invested in America. So I hope that the U.S. citizens living in America can have a more appreciation for investors like SK, because these guys are really helping accelerate the technology alliance. And earlier today, we had live Governor Dunleavy from Alaska speak about the Alaska LNG project. So my question to you, Mick, is what are some of the key enablers that could accelerate, whether it's LNG, whether it's the private-public partnerships that companies like SK have entered?
If I had to give you one answer, it would be exactly what Dunleavy was talking about. I met him several times, by the way, the governor of Alaska. Very impressed. We always used to stop off in Alaska on our flights back from Asia going to the United States. Very impressive gentleman. There's one word to answer your question, which is energy. There's very few things, James, that Donald Trump really cares about. And this is not unusual to Donald Trump. Most presidents have to deal with 100 different issues, 1,000 different issues. But they run for office because of 5 or 6 that they really, really care about. Donald Trump really cares about energy. He really cares about defense spending. He really cares about getting out of forever wars. He cares about immigration. He cares about energy tremendously. It's one of the driving things that made him want to run for office. And when he talks about the deregulatory agenda in the United States, making it easier to get energy to market, that's a priority for him and for every single cabinet secretary. Keep in mind, as chief of staff, I used to run the cabinet. So I had regular interactions with the Secretary of Energy, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Interior, and all of them were tasked by Donald Trump to do more on energy production, driving down the cost of energy, driving up exports of energy, driving new innovations in energy. The previous speaker was correct to mention small modular nuclear. That was something that Secretary of Energy Rick Perry spent a great deal of his time under in the first administration. Anything that Korea and the U.S. can do together on energy is going to move to the head of the class. It's going to get the attention not only of Donald Trump, and again, Donald Trump has, 1,000 things to worry about. If I called him tonight and said, you know what, boss, we should talk about energy agreements with South Korea, he's going to say, Mick, I just cut a peace deal in the United States, in the Mideast. I don't have time for this. And he'd be right. But if you call the Secretary of the Interior, if you call the Secretary of Energy and said, look, we want to talk about energy agreements between the United States and Korea, I don't care what it looks like. I don't care if it's solar. I don't care if it's natural gas. I don't care if it's nuclear. I don't care if it's old-fashioned oil. It doesn't make any difference. The man cares about energy. And when he cares about it, the rest of his team does. So the answer to your question is, what's the first place I would go to continue to strengthen a relationship? That would be the answer.
As you know, I spent 2 days with Governor Dunleavy in Korea. And I found him to be a very, very passionate and a visionary leader. And he wants to get this LNG project here in Korea done on a win-win basis. We also had a National Assembly woman who spoke today, and she referenced the importance of LNG, but of course, in a way that makes sense for Korea. So we will stay tuned, and your insight just now was very helpful. So just moving along, Korea has been the #1 investor in the United States for several years. And in the 40 meetings we had in the U.S., it does not seem like there's a lot of recognition of the Korean companies investing in America. In fact, our studies have shown that 80% of the $140 billion that Korea has invested in America is residing in the red states, whether it's Texas, whether it's Indiana, whether it's Georgia, Tennessee, those kind of cities. But for some reason, it does not seem to resonate. So how do we ask the Lee administration to better promote Korea's economic contributions in alignment with Donald Trump's America First agenda, especially in revitalizing U.S. manufacturing in strategic industries, including auto and energy? And maybe we can ask Jakob to get us started.
Well, thank you. How to communicate? It's absolutely true, and Korea has committed a lot of further investments, and investments are going on. Factories are being built, and I think they're also very, extremely appreciated employers. There is one thing on the recognition, perhaps in the president's eyes of the investments. Somehow that is seemingly right now It's a good offset. And well, maybe let me first start. I think that maybe Korea can learn from late Prime Minister Abe of Japan. He was very forcefully doing the same argument and successfully doing the same argument. And he had a map of the US, and I've seen that map so many times, where they point each of the investments and exactly how much that is and how many jobs that is. And that was shown in every meeting, working level meeting up to the president's meeting. And there was one PowerPoint slide where it's just pointing out the different investments and how they have been going up, and also showing some of the trade deficits and Japan's relatively still in total number high, but relative to other countries declining, and how the economy is integrating. So I think there is a communications side to that, which is clearly important. I will stop there. I think we could talk a little bit more about trade negotiating strategies, but we probably will save that for a little bit later.
Okay, and Moo-hwan, I'd like to ask you the same question, because with SK being such a huge investor in America, do you feel that you're getting the right attention from the U.S.?
Yes or no. So as a matter of fact, I think Korea's contribution to U.S. American first policy might be really clear, given the whole circumstances we already have. For example, the battery business. So, three major Korean company of the battery has been investing as much as like a 54 billion US dollar up to now, which is tremendous, size. And their capacity of the production is about like a 480 gigawatt hour, which is double a volume that US entirely has imported from China last year, which is a really tremendous number. Right? But still, we didn't really have proper recognition from the US government that battery is really crucial and strategic asset for US security, national security, for example. So, I mean, as you probably know, battery is not really just one single component for EV. It's just more extensively, used for lots of equipment and, military, vehicles, and other equipment that we need to think about for the security guys. And of course, the grid ESS is one of the really crucial factors that, now US is really relying on Chinese-made battery. So I think, there need to be some substantial change from perception, what the battery looks like. We often talk about the batteries might be new oil for our electrification era going forward. So I think we need to convey and deliver that message to U.S. government that battery might be one of the really crucial assets that U.S. already have, and they need to leverage that asset for their further development of the market and industry.
Thank you, Moo-hwan. And Mick, just as a follow-up, I remember when I was in D.C., whenever we referenced President Lee Jae-myung, people really did not know who he was, right? Obviously, he just became president 2 weeks ago. We had a special runoff very quickly, snap election. So people did not know who President Lee Jae-myung is. In fact, I saw a lot of potential discrepancies on the description, which we wanted to kind of ratify and correct. But you've been in the White House. You've had one of the most important jobs in the White House. Even back in those days, how does the White House look at Korea? And how do you think President Trump would look at President Lee Jae-myung and Korea?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Here's how, generally speaking, how, and keep in mind, and James, we didn't get a chance to talk about this. I was a member of the United States Congress for 6 years before I was in the White House. So I've been both in the legislature and in the executive branch. So let me see if I can answer your question this way. A lot of our perceptions of foreign nations are driven by consumer goods more than anything else. And I'm sitting here listening to the other two panelists talk about all the Korean investment in the United States, and batteries is a huge piece of the puzzle, and I get that, but it's not a consumer good. People don't know the battery that goes into their car or into their other appliance and so forth. We know LG, we know Kia, we know Hyundai, and I I'm hard pressed to go much deeper than that on the list. So that is a challenge that you face, because it's not just the American public who perceives things through the sort of the eyes of the consumer product, but it's also members of Congress. If you and I were going to sit down and have dinner one night and talk about how to do outreach to the members of Congress, it would be educating them on the things that they don't see every single day. They see Hyundai cars, they see Kia, they see LG televisions and refrigerators and all the other appliances and so forth. But they don't see the intermediate goods that go into other products. And that is going to be a large challenge. You asked me a larger question, which is how does the White House perceive Korea? The first time around, in the first administration, President Moon was there. I remember visiting with him at the presidential house before we went up to the DMZ to meet with Chairman Kim from the North. And we perceive them as being a partner, a military partner, not first and foremost, but certainly high up on the list was the military relationship because of the history and so forth, because of the presence of the U.S. troops. That is the nature of the relationship. The challenge that you face is that it's a new relationship, a relatively new relationship. I just got back from speaking in Ireland and the United Kingdom for a couple of different days, and these are relationships that go back several hundred years. And in my country, several hundred years is a long time. I know that's not the case in Korea, but it's the case with us. We have these long-standing relationships with other countries. They're cultural. We speak the same language as they do in Britain. We speak the same language as they do in Australia and so forth. So there's going to be cultural challenges to the relationship. Doesn't mean it's negative. It just means there's hurdles that don't exist in our other relationships with our other friends. It's a tremendous opportunity to educate people as to what the nature of the relationship is. But it's going to take work. There's no question about it. This is not the type of natural bilateral relationship that we might have, say, with Britain or with, say, Ireland or Australia. And that's going to be a challenge.
Mick is from the great state of South Carolina. So I guess this starts with South Carolina. How does Korea Inc. Educate and kind of create some excitement about Korea in your state? And if we can do South Carolina, we can do anywhere.
Yeah, what a great question. I'll give away some of the secrets I've given to other countries. I'm good friends. Was the special envoy to Northern Ireland, and I have a close relationship both with the United Kingdom and with the Republic of Ireland. And several years ago, somebody asked me a similar question. I said, Mick, how do we get through Washington? The bureaucracy in Washington is really rough. How do we go deeper? How do we develop those relationships? And I pointed out to them, look, there's 50 states here who want to do business. You just had the governor of Alaska on here to talk about the relationship between your country and Alaska. You could do that with all 50 states. The British and the Irish are in the process now of cutting free trade deals with individual states. I know that sounds outrageous, but keep in mind, under our federal system in the United States, there are certain things that states deal with directly. The state of South Carolina has complete control over the practice of law. The state of South Carolina has nearly complete control over the sale of insurance. The state of South Carolina has some control over banking and other financial services. All states do. Ireland has cut a deal, I think, with Texas on the practice of law and the providing of financial services and so forth. Tremendous opportunities here. And so many of the individual states, James, are now looking to develop these relationships. I remember, and I'll stop with this, when I was a state lawmaker, this is going back 20 years now, I was in the state legislature. Nobody knew who I was. It was not important. But the governor of South Carolina asked me to go to China with him on a delegation. We sent a state delegation from South Carolina to Dalian in China, to the World Economic Forum, to try and develop the relationship directly, and that's the key, directly between South Carolina and China at the time. Those opportunities continue to exist today, and I encourage you to explore them. I'd be more than happy to help you with them.
Great. Great, insight. And I will be sure that the Korean government understands that they should spend more time, in the local states as possible. So now let's talk about something a little bit more serious. We have the July 8th deadline looming. We have the Trade Minister Young-gu, who's physically in Washington, D.C. Today. And he'll be meeting with Ambassador Jameson Greer and Secretary Howard Lutnick. I actually have a lot of confidence with Trade Minister Young-gu. He was educated in the U.S. He had chances to pursue more of a lucrative financial career, but he became a government official in Korea. So I think that he's doing this job for all the right reasons. So I hope that he'll be very successful. So now, what are some of the key considerations that he should, partake in during his negotiations? And maybe we can ask you, Jacob, for your suggestions.
Sure. So we heard earlier that there has been disappointingly few trade deals announced, and I think that's a general sense. And the UK deal, after UK deal, not much has happened. And the reason I understand why not much has happened is that the positions are very different. And I think it goes back to for all of the major trading partners are not really sharing the position, are quite far away from what and also to a certain extent having difficulty in imagining or understanding what's good enough or what's the end game is and how a good deal would look like from the US perspective, where that is previously been very well communicated with very strong requirements, sectoral, but there is very little that's coming out. So you have that, but you also have the timeline to think of. And, Besson said that the other day, he hinted on extension. There are 19 ongoing negotiations with trade partners, and all of them cannot be solved in 3 weeks. That doesn't really matter. That doesn't really work. So the best you can wish for is to have an overall agreement on the principles and pushing for an overall agreement with the principles in good faith and trying as hard as you can, coming up with measures which you believe would be useful for actually balancing the trade deficit. That's really what's mattered right now, and anything else is. And I think also for the U.S. Unless it goes to the president, until it goes to the president, not much is happening, and and from that perspective, I think that Korea would need to come up with. This is again, what I said. This goes against the DNA of any bureaucracy to voluntarily give up things and offering things. But if you look at the USTR report, it's pretty clear what some of the issues are. And to me, it seems to be a very reasonable thing to, for instance, look at on the beef side. You have a 30-month for cattle. You can probably review that. Testing for vehicle standards can probably be reviewed, but it has to be something symbolical. And I think that Korea will have to think hard on something that can be perceived really well, but for the time being, I think it's just to negotiate in as good faith as possible, coming up with ideas, and then when the deadline comes, hope that Korea, hopefully reach an agreement, but that's quite unlikely. At least get another extension. But you have, on top of that, you have to think about the 232 tariffs, which is really, really hard. That's where you have the automotive tariffs and the steel tariffs, which are not on the negotiating table right now. So it's really hard, and that's what really matters to Korea, and not so much the bilateral tariffs. So it's not an easy task that he has right now. But I think the advice is just keep on talking, come up with ideas, but also do not panic, because Korea is not the only partner that is under these time pressures.
Yeah, I think you mentioned negotiating good faith during these times. But Mick, is that really enough? Let's just be a little bit pragmatic, right? We only have 3 weeks left. When you were in the Trump administration, Trump 1.0, the trade deficit was at $20 billion. even at that time, President Trump told us it's too high. It's now $65 billion, right? But let's not forget, $140 billion have gone into U.S. from Korean companies, which have added to that. And lastly, the topic of non-tariff barriers. At AMCHAM, we identified 66 non-tariff barriers, some of which Jakob referenced. So what can two countries do to get a deal done that makes it a win-win for both countries?
And the win-win is the right way to look at it. As I mentioned before, that's what Trump wants. A couple of things people forget. Back in, I think it was late 2017, 2018, Trump went to a G7 meeting, I believe it was in Canada, and his European friends were giving him a hard time about his tariff posture. And I think out of frustration, he said, look, let's just do 0, 0, 0. 0 tariffs, 0 non-tariff barriers, and 0 government subsidies. And of course, the Europeans looked at their shoes and sort of trotted off because they knew they couldn't do that. But that's where Donald Trump is coming from. In that moment, I think you saw Donald Trump sort of really saying what he feels about trade, which is all he wants is a level playing field. He believes that American businesses can succeed if they're on a level playing field. And I got to tell you, I've seen him have this conversation enough. If they can't succeed on a level playing field, he's not really interested in helping them. He's interested in taking away the impediments, but not in giving them an unfair advantage. Trump is looking for balance. On the deadline, by the way, I think you're absolutely right to think that an extension is possible. And the fact that the trade delegation from Korea has been there several times and is there right now, you've taught me something I didn't know about them being there now. That counts. That does count. The effort counts. Trump is not looking again to penalize anybody. And being there and entering into good faith negotiations, I would expect that deadline to be extended on a country by country basis. But all of the countries that have been there and engaged in conversations, I would expect them to get an extension. Finally, I'll say this, and I would give this piece of advice to anybody dealing with Donald Trump on anything. Don't just ask for something. Trump gets tired very quickly of countries from all over the world, foreign leaders, delegations, whatever, coming in and asking for things. It does get tedious after a while. I suggested to a colleague of mine from a foreign nation one time when he came in to meet with the president, he says, how do you want to handle this meeting? I said, look, offer us something. Have a deal. Engage in a negotiation. Don't come in and just ask for something. And these folks, actually, it was a brilliant piece of diplomacy, came in and said essentially, look, Mr. President, we want this tariff treatment and so forth, and you know that we do. But we got to tell you this. Here's what we'll do. We will offer you beneficial treatment for Americans who have retired in our country when it comes to our healthcare system. Right now, they're not allowed access to our healthcare system. But I tell you what, we do a deal, and we'll let the Americans who retire in this country to get healthcare in our system. Trump loved that idea. It was a negotiation. They were doing deals. That's what he wants to do. He doesn't want to give. And to be honest with you, he doesn't want to take. He wants a give and a take that, again, allow a win-win situation. So to your trade delegation, to anybody dealing with Trump, represent your country, represent your best interests. I get all of that. But figure out how to do a deal where Trump gets something and gives something at the same time.
A couple of the sectors that I think President Trump has focused on are autos, steel, and aluminum. We haven't heard from you at all, Hector, but let me just ask you a couple of questions. You had mentioned that GM Korea produces, 500,000 cars in Korea that are exported to the U.S. Hyundai exports around 1 million cars that are made here to the United States. Obviously, the tariff that they're considering, which fluctuates a lot, could be pretty significant to both of these countries. So what are you at GM Korea thinking about, and what are you doing to really help enhance GM vehicle sales in Korea, because the domestic market is also very important for you?
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, Definitely taking proactive measures to be sustainable is what we need to do. And as you know, as you mentioned, the auto industry is undergoing major transformation, and GM is not immune. So far, we have been able to maintain Korea in production, but it's only because we have taken measures. As you have heard, we recently announced a strategic decision to make our operations more efficient. And we are doing that because we want to continue selling in Korea and we want to be successful in Korea. And I think it's important that we have an engagement with the stakeholders and we allow those transformations to take place without having excessive discussion as to the motives of the transformation. This is needed to be successful in Korea. Now, if you ask me, I think you mentioned GM Korea exports a lot of vehicles to the world globally, and we only import a handful of them. We believe that achieving a more fair trade balance between the countries that operate is important. You mentioned the campaign that we signed with you, the MOU for Buy American. I think that is very important. We want to see more GM vehicles in Korea. Korea is a very competitive market, and defining a policy that allows foreign direct investment companies to stay in Korea, we think it would be very important. And that might require incentives, that might require tax exceptions, and other things to make sure that we are successful in this foreign market.
You know, for the audience, the Buy America campaign that Hector just spoke about was an MOU with the chairman of SK, who is also the chairman of the very important Korea Chamber of Commerce. So this MOU really positions GM Korea vehicles to be included in the fleet for all the KCCI members. And if I'm not mistaken, Hector, I believe Chairman Choi Tae-won on the spot said, yes, I will buy a few more GM cars immediately. And that's the power of the Buy America campaign. And we hope that next time President Trump visits Korea, he'll see a lot more GM Escalades and other cars of that nature. Because I know that's what makes him happy. Is that correct, Mick? He loves American cars in Korea, right?
He does, and he doesn't understand why folks don't buy them. I've often encouraged foreign countries where I've spoken to simply let American cars in, simply because I think that there's a taste difference. I'm not sure. GM is certainly an exception, but I mean, generally speaking, folks around the world like smaller vehicles than we produce in this country. It would not be difficult to allow more American cars in, because I just don't think they take that much of the domestic markets overseas. But yet, no, Donald Trump does care about automobiles. Keep in mind, he sort of sees the world through the perspective of 1978 or 1980, when the big three American, Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors were sort of the world powerhouses for automobiles. Cars continue to be very, very important for him, absolutely.
Yeah. And if I may add, Jim, I think you Mick mentioned it, harmonization of the requirements of the standards would allow us to bring more vehicles into the country and enable greater presence in the Korean market.
I know we have around 5 minutes left. So what I want to do is just hear from, from some of you, but just what are some of the policy improvements that Korea can make? Because we all know that I've been promoting, helping set up Korea as a regional headquarters of Asia. Mick, we have 5,000, right, multinational companies in Singapore, 1,400 in Hong Kong, 900 in Shanghai, and in this beautiful country with outstanding infrastructure, less than 100? It doesn't make sense. So let's hear, why aren't U.S. companies setting up more here in Korea, and what should they change? Jakob.
Well, there are some geographical issues as well, but I wouldn't say normally that Seoul is too much further away from many other Asian capitals than Singapore is, because it was sort of on the other end. So Korea is not the only country that's considering this. So if you go, I was sort of looking at it from the trade perspective, going back. If you were setting up headquarters, it's basically tax and migration issues that are the key considerations for anyone. So you're seeing more and more, if you want to have and then it's also access to work opportunities for spouses is also another extremely important, which is meaning basically immigration and visa status. Tax, income tax, really important. Visa, access to working visas for not only the expats, but also for the spouses, which is an issue many times. And then you have also visas for helpers. You need, with most, and that's where, but tax on, of course, company tax, but also private income tax. That's really what's driving headquarter decisions. So, corporate income tax, private personal income tax, visa. It's quite simple. It's just like that.
But
Korea has all the infrastructure necessary.
But let me add a few more. You know, the labor inflexibility has always been difficult. Simply put, you cannot hire and fire employees here in Korea like in the US, where it's the employment at will concept. And second, the CEO risk in Korea is also very, very challenging. And Mick, I'm not sure if you know, but in Korea, the CEO is personally at risk for anything that can happen under their watch. So we have CEOs who can go to prison for anything that could happen in their watch. So I think those are some of the policy issues that we want to just at least message back to the Korean government. But in the balance of the time we have, I want to just ask you, Mick, we have the APEC summit happening here in Korea in October. Obviously, it's very, very important for President Trump to be here in Korea. We know that we know that President Xi Jinping from China is fully committed on coming. Given your extensive experience, what deal should President Trump sign here in the APEC summit for him to come to Korea?
Well, you hate to think that it would take that long to get a trade deal, but I certainly think that would be on the table. I have no idea if your national airline is considering buying any Boeing jets, but you saw the impact that had in Qatar. Trump likes big deals. He likes announcing big deals, and those deals take months and sometimes years to negotiate. Anybody who thinks that, you know, Qatar agreed to buy Boeing jets while Trump was there doesn't understand how that works. When we went to Vietnam in 2019, when I was chief of staff, the Vietnamese airlines announced a huge Boeing purchase at the time. Trump likes the pomp and circumstance of a big deal. So maybe it's trade, maybe it's airplanes, maybe it's something on automobiles. I don't know. But he does like things that make the front page of the news. And anything you've got that factors into that would be helpful. I wasn't aware of the CEO risk. By the way, that's a real concern. Your regulatory environment is real. I'm not familiar with the tax environment or the immigration environment, but what you've just mentioned to me, I just got back from New York City. I was there all week last week speaking to groups of CEOs, and I got to tell you, they would think twice about setting up organizations in Korea if they had the risk of going to jail. So that's a real consideration. But when it comes to Trump, he likes good news coverage back home. So figure out a way to get that to happen.
Well, since you talked about the national, airline of Korea, I was just with the chairman of Korean Airlines recently, and just a few months ago, they signed off on 50 Boeing aircraft for Korean Airlines. So that's a huge, huge, signing.
Trump would love that, by the way. Trump would
Yes.
love that. And by the way, keep in mind, you might be underutilizing your natural allies in the relationship. Boeing has a tremendous presence in the White House. Donald Trump would take Kelly's calls any time. The people you do business with can also be your ambassadors. So go and find the people you do business with in the U.S. to say nice things about Korea. Trump listens to a lot of different sources, and the people you do business with can sometimes be some of your best advocates.
We obviously heard from the governor of Alaska today. We also heard from the National Assemblywoman. My hope is that we can get a big deal done for Alaska LNG here in Korea on a win-win basis. Maybe that's what we can hope for. So with that, I want to thank the panelists for your time today. But I also want to thank you, Mick. I know it's late in the evening for you in the East Coast. I know that you are doing really big things in America and in the globe. I hope to host you in person one day. So thank you so much, Mick. You were outstanding. You made a great contribution to our event today. Thank you,
James,
Mick.
thanks again for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Let's give him a big round of applause.